Okay, so just like I did with Trump and Harris, I am going to do a fact check of um Walz and Vance. Ugh. So, first thing to notice when watching the debate is even though JD Vance said some really um really big lies and to some extent horrible things, he did it in a calm manner. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't shouting, he wasn't acting like a lunatic. Because the one thing that those two have in common is Midwest nice. I mean, yeah, in order to set us off, you really gotta say something really insane. And actually, it did look at one point that Tim Walz was going to swear. Just like Kamala Harris in her debate, he had to hold back down a swear word. It certainly looked like it anyway. So, go away with the ad. All right. So this fact check again was done in real time, so I'm sure they missed stuff. But let's start with energy and climate change. So, Vance, if you believe that carbon emissions drive climate change, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to restore as much American manufacturing as possible. I'm sorry, what? What the fuck does that have to do with anything? And you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America. Again, how is that going to drive down carbon emissions? Unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite. Now, I just want to say, now I get it that energy has to be transported. That's probably what he means. But using fossil fuels is still using fossil fuels. What the hell? But anyway, let's do the fact check. Under the Biden-Harris administration, the U.S. produced a record amount of oil last year, averaging 12.9 million barrels per day. That eclipsed the previous record of 12.3 million barrels per day set under former President Donald Trump in 2019. Because, we can't tell the truth or anything. I mean, it's well known that, well, at least it should be well known that Biden has increased oil production. Now, granted, he's considering this a temporary solution until cleaner energy gets a better chance of getting a foothold. But he said it that it's needed. Last year was also a record year for domestic production of natural gas, which Tim Walz pointed out. Much of the domestic boom in oil and gas production is a result of hydraulic fracturing or fracking techniques. While campaigning for president in 2019, Kamala Harris said she would ban fracking, but she changed course when she joined the Biden administration. Now, some people might say that she's just doing it now to get elected in Pennsylvania. But maybe she did change her mind. I mean, you should do that when you get more facts. Maybe she did change her mind in good faith. In addition to record oil and gas production, the Biden-Harris administration has also coincided with rapid growth of solar and wind power. Meanwhile, coal has declined as a source of electricity, which is great because even though there's a bunch of coal miners who are whining that they come from I don't know how many generations of coal miners, that's not a good argument because Slave owners. There were multiple generations of those. We still ended slavery, though some people probably want it back. But, so the fact that it's a tradition in your family isn't exactly an argument. So it's great that coal has declined. Natural gas is probably less problematic than coal, but still I wouldn't call that clean energy. So, yeah, like I said, Biden has said that he wants to he's still looking for oil. He's still doing drill baby drill until solar and wind power gets a foothold. It gets enough of a foothold that we can rely less and less on the other stuff. All right. So, let's see, what else do we have? Okay, so the moderator to Governor Walz mentioned that President Trump has called Governor Walz mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree? And this was a word salad, but let's see what the fact check is. What the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. Number one, Vance consistently, not just here but in other places, even though Tim Walz said these are the stats, Vance just went running with his talking point of how horrible things are under Biden-Harris. And this is one of them. It's a matter of Vance saying, yeah, I'm going to completely ignore the stats you're quoting, because he did say later on that you shouldn't listen to experts, you should listen to Trump. Because somehow listening to experts and common sense are polar opposites. But I'm sure that's a fact check we'll get to. Vance also said, I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about this idea that carbon emissions drives all the climate change. Who the fuck said that? Let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument. Let's not, because nobody is freaking saying that. Are carbon emissions part of it? Absolutely. Is it the driving force? No. Nobody is saying that. Former President Trump has in fact repeatedly called climate change a hoax and made light of its effects. Yes, he also said, and Tim Walz pointed this out, that it'll just allow for more oceanfront property, beachfront property, because what he fails to mention is that the previous beachfront property isn't there anymore because it's underwater. But anyway, let's continue. His rhetoric on climate change has shifted over the years, with the former president at times saying he believed the issue was real, but did not know if it was driven by human activity. Which is what some Republicans do think, so yeah. It's like, there's climate change is real, but there's nothing we can do about it. Boo-hoo-hoo. Scientists agree that the climate is changing and that the change is being driven by human activity, specifically burning fossil fuels, which increases carbon emissions. Lord. Okay, so I was wrong. They do put most of the blame on carbon emissions. I stand corrected. Now, about this idea that humans aren't causing climate change. In the same breath, a lot of these people are also pointing out that the climate has always changed. Millions of years the climate was different than it is now, which is true. Which is why this is human-made climate change, because it wasn't this fast. That is the point. Climate change is a problem now because of how quickly it's changing, that species, not just humans, but other species of plants and animals cannot keep up. That is the point. Not whether, the climate only started changing when the Industrial Revolution started happening. No, that is not the point. The point is the speed at which climate is changing. So, moving on to immigration. And let's start with Vance. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that will be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage by doing a good day's work. Okay, is he seriously thinking that the minimum wage is a good wage? That's what I'm getting from this. And as far as working for less than minimum wage, no shit, that's why it's a minimum wage. And that isn't a good wage either. But at least it's better than less. Let's see. And the jobs that he's claiming are being undercut by all these illegal aliens who are coming into this country and working for less. These are jobs that Americans don't want to do anyway. That's why these companies have to rely on undocumented workers. And all you have to do is look at places like Florida when Ron DeSantis threatened illegal, the undocumented workers, they just stopped working. They just took a day. None of them went to work. And there was nobody there to pick the fruit. Nobody there to transport it. And the economy would go to shit if we do not have these undocumented workers who are, again, doing jobs that Americans do not want to do. It's not like Americans were knocking down the door of these companies where they're fruit picking in this oppressive heat, and that someone decided, oh, you know what, let's encourage people to cross the border illegally so we can, pay them less. No, that's not how that works. But anyway, let's get to the actual fact check. As the vice presidential candidates discuss how to address concerns over immigration, increased migration, both legal and illegal, has helped to grow the labor force in recent years, allowing employers to keep adding jobs at a rapid clip without putting much upward pressure on prices. Over the last 12 months, for example, the foreign-born workforce has grown by nearly 1.5 million people, while the native-born workforce has shrunk by 768,000 people, mostly due to retirements, according to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Were it not for the influx of immigrant workers, the U.S. economy would likely be shrinking. So again, this isn't about immigrants taking jobs from Americans, which, by the way, this includes both legal immigration, which, as I'm sure this will be pointed out in the fact checks, J.D. Vance doesn't see a lot of this legal immigration as being legal. So that's how he gets around that. Basically, if you're an immigrant he doesn't like, aka black and brown people, he's going to claim that you're here illegally, whether the program they're here under is legal or not. Anyway, and yes, the population is shrinking in the US. Probably one of the reasons why, and this never got brought up, but this is it did get brought up, sort of. This is why Republicans have a problem with women getting abortions. It's not just that they want to be cruel to women, which I'm sure a lot of them do. It's this idea that we need more American babies because our population is shrinking. Because we don't want these, dirty illegals that are coming over our border. Because they don't even, unless they're white people, they don't see them as legal immigrants, even if they come in the correct way. Anyway, continuing on. They do not appear to be displacing native-born workers. The share of working-age men who were in the workforce in August was 89.5%, higher than all but 1 month during the Trump administration. The share of working-age women who were in the workforce last month was the highest ever, 78.4%. And I'd like to point out that unemployment is still very low. You do not count unemployed, and this does not include the undocumented. This is just American citizens, is my understanding. I could be wrong. So, our unemployment is low. And I don't know why Tim Walz didn't, he says he's a bad debater, so it probably never hit him. But our unemployment rate is low. If this were true, we would have high unemployment. We do not. We do not have high unemployment. So that's another stat that goes against Vance's imagination. All right. So next fact check. A lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. Kamala Harris led fentanyl into our communities at record levels. Once again, we heard that undocumented immigrants are bringing fentanyl into the country, a myth which has been debunked. In reality, close to 90% of illicit fentanyl is seized at official border crossings. Immigration authorities say nearly all of that is smuggled by people who are legally authorized to cross the border, and more than half by U.S. citizens. Virtually none is seized by the migrants seeking asylum. Which you could probably figure out if you weren't, hateful and xenophobic. Also, NPR has reported that the U.S. is currently seeking significantly less fentanyl in circulation and fewer overdoses. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention estimate that fentanyl-related deaths dropped by roughly 10% last year. But again, these people don't care if facts say something because, Vance even said that experts and common sense are at odds. He said that at the debate, not in those words, but he basically said. All right. So let's talk taxes now. And again, Vance. If you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. Oh, really? It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. Despite Trump's frequent claims to the contrary, the 2017 tax cut was not the largest in U.S. history. However, it was big enough to blow a large hole in the federal budget. Tax revenue as a share of GDP dropped to 60.3% in the year after the tax cut was passed, down from 17.1% the year before and an average of 17.7% over the past 40 years. Even though federal spending also declined as a share of GDP, in 2018 the deficit topped $785 billion that year and approached $1 trillion in 2019, the year before the pandemic. So yep, his tax cuts did a wonderful thing. According to the Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center, more than half the savings from the 2017 tax cut went to pay 10% of earners, and more than a quarter went to the top 1%, which shouldn't surprise anybody. Large parts of the 2017 tax cut are due to expire next year. Trump has proposed extending all of them while also calling for an additional cut in the corporate tax rate. Harris has proposed extending the tax cuts for everyone making less than $400,000 a year, or 97% of the population, while raising taxes on corporations and the wealthy. While Harris's tax proposals are similar to those made by President Biden, her plan differs from the president's in some respects. For example, she called for a 28% tax on millionaires' investment income, which is lower than the 39.6% rate Biden has proposed. Under the Biden-Harris administration, the IRS has also beefed up tax enforcement to ensure... sorry about that. Alright, to ensure that wealthier people and businesses pay what they owe. The GOP lawmakers have criticized that effort, and it could be reversed in a second Trump administration. Exactly. This scaremongering that the GOP did when Biden proposed money to increase the IRS tax agents, they tried to scare people into saying that, they're going to audit more people who shouldn't be audited, rather than that they would go after the tax cheats, which their taxes are so freaking complicated that they need more agents to do that. So anyway, that is that fact check. Let's move on to healthcare, which, I'm sorry, that just... And of course, Vance again. And for those who are wondering why this fact check only fact checks Vance, and he also whined about it at the debate, is that if you're the one who's going to lie, then you're going to be fact checked. If Vance if Walz isn't the one lying, why would you fact check him? What is there to fact check? And actually, they did ask Walz about something he misspoke about. Anyway, to healthcare. I think you can make a really good argument that Trump salvaged Obamacare. I'm sorry, you misspelled savage. Which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came about. Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. Every other week, and I think I might be generous about that, every other week, he and the GOP were trying to dismantle Obamacare. That was not salvaging it. Okay, the fact check. During his presidency, Trump undermined the Affordable Care Act in many ways, for instance, by slashing funding for advertising and free navigators who help people sign up for a health insurance plan on healthcare.gov. And rather than deciding to save the ACA, he tried hard to get Congress to repeal it and failed. Many, many times. The Biden administration had reversed course from Trump's management of the Affordable Care Act Increasing subsidies have made premiums more affordable in the marketplace, and enrollment has surged. The uninsurance rate has dropped to its lowest point ever during the Biden administration. And I think Tim Walz actually mentioned some of this. Like the fact that Trump actually tried to kill Obamacare. The Affordable Care Act was passed in 2010 and is entrenched in the healthcare system. Republicans successfully ran against Obamacare for about a decade, but it has faded as a campaign issue this year. Of course it has, because people like it. People like that they can get affordable health care. So that's an issue that Republicans decided, yeah, that's a losing issue, let's move on to something else. And it's only a matter of time before they shut up about abortion. Because that's an obvious losing issue. Which, it sounded like Vance did something I did, that you start a sentence with one thought and then pivot. And so then you end up sounding like you have no idea what you're talking about. Anyway, let's move on. Moderator. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan. So Vance. Look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Vance was asked about comments he's made recently, trying to fill in the details of Trump's comments during the presidential debate that he had the concepts of a plan when it comes to replacing the Affordable Care Act. The Harris-Walz campaign needled the Republican ticket ahead of the debate about not having anything clearer to say on health policy. But when Vance refers to laws and regulations in place protecting people with pre-existing conditions, those laws and regulations are the Affordable Care Act. Exactly. For context, before the Affordable Care Act, insurance companies could deny coverage or charge higher premiums when people had pre-existing conditions, which could be anything from diabetes or cancer to acne or back problems. The ACA made that illegal, and now everyone has to be covered, and their premiums are based on their income, not how healthy they are. Which, again, Tim Walz mentioned some of this at the debate. Risk pools previously could essentially sort people into a healthy bucket, where you could pay less for a health plan, and a sick bucket, where you pay more and can't get coverage at all. The ACA requires insurance companies to take all people into the risk pool. Health policy experts across the political spectrum say it's a terrible idea to go back to pre-ACA policies. But again, those are experts which Vance thinks shouldn't be listened to because experts can get things wrong sometimes. Right, because common sense never leads you astray. It's amazing how many people will say something is common sense and other people look at them and think, what are you talking about? So, yeah. Of Vance's idea, conservative health policy expert Joe Antos told Roll Call last week it doesn't make any sense, adding, you need some healthy people in there with some sick people. Otherwise, you're going to have a financially unsustainable system. Exactly. And let's face it, you never know when you're going to need the insurance. Just because you're healthy today doesn't mean tomorrow something doesn't happen. I mean, obviously you don't want that, but you can't assume. And let's face it, young people have this way of doing this thing called getting old. They get older, they can get sick. Of course you're going to need insurance at some point. Why would you want to wait till you're going to get sick? I was told by my dental hygienist that a lot of dental insurance won't, if say you need some major thing done, whether it be a crown or a root canal or whatever, that if you try to get insurance right before the procedure, so it would be covered, that the insurance is not going to cover it. They're going to make you wait for like a year because they don't want people to just get the insurance so they can pay for a procedure and then get dropped, which actually makes sense. I mean, that's not what insurance is supposed to be about. You're supposed to have it just in case. It's not oh, well, darn, it turns out I have cancer. Better get health insurance so other people will pay for it. That's not how this works. All right, let's keep going. Cynthia Cox of CFF, a nonpartisan research group, tweeted a thread enumerating how perilous things were when insurance companies could consider your pre-existing conditions when deciding what coverage to offer you, if any. Now pre-ACA, another personal story. Pre-ACA, I just could not handle getting a pap smear. I just couldn't handle it. I mean, it just, whenever they were trying to get the sample, I had this nails on chalkboard feeling. It was just cringy. I just couldn't handle it. So I had to have an ultrasound. That's how I found out I had uterine fibroids, I had ovarian cysts, and a gallstone. So basically, that rendered me uninsurable. So I had to go into that risk pool, as I mentioned earlier. The fact that now I can get decent coverage thanks to the ACA is amazing. I mean, why would I want to go back to, now granted, I had a hysterectomy and gallbladder surgery, so technically I don't have that problem anymore. But would that matter to insurance companies? I don't know. I don't know if we went back, if they would see that my pre-existing condition is no longer there, so they could insure me. I honestly have no clue if they would be able to. I don't know. I mean, they might see me as damaged goods for all I know. I really don't know. All right. Cops, firefighters, miners, offshore drillers, and pro athletes were denied plans, she wrote, because their jobs made some insurers think that they were too risky to cover. And if your kid had more than 3 ear infections in the previous year, that could be grounds for denial too. So basically, your ability to get insured depended on whether the insurance companies wanted to insure you, wanted to take the risk. I mean, yes, miners have a hard job, cops have a hard job, firefighters have a hard job. But offshore drillers, they all have very risky jobs. But then they could actually be one of those lucky ones who get out of it unscathed. You don't know. Why should we punish people simply because something bad might happen? I mean, it's the same way with car insurance for 16-year-old boys. Their premiums are generally higher because they do risky behaviors, because they're stupid teenagers. Teenage girls get lesser deductible on their car insurance or premium or whatever, simply because they are more risk averse than boys are. But that's not always the case. There are plenty of boys out there who don't act like complete morons, and there are some girls who do act like complete morons. So, we can't go by, oh, well, this person is destined to be in a car crash, or in this case, this person is destined to be shot or have a house fall on him, like firefighters. Miners, well, they're destined to get black lung, which, depending on the mine. Offshore drillers, I don't know, their rig could explode. I do not know what's up with that. Pro athletes, well, yeah. Depending on the sport, you could end up with a broken arm, broken leg, or you have arrhythmia. All sorts of things can happen. And that's without the contact sports. I'm talking things like gymnastics now. And football, I'm not even talking about the contact part of it. So, yeah, there are certain sports, certain jobs that make you more likely to get sick and injured. But again, it's not a guarantee. All right. So then we move to guns. And again, bans. Thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, again, not a thing, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartel. All right. Actually, now the fact check. Actually, there is long-standing evidence showing the gun smuggling route is going in the opposite direction. Most recently, the Mexican Attorney General of the Republic and the United States Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives made an effort to trace the origin and number of firearms in Mexico coming from or through the United States. Mexico's Secretariat of Foreign Relations found that 70% to 90% of traced firearms originated from and passed through the U.S. The ATF and U.S. Government Accountability Office estimated a lower rate of 68%. All right, so still not good. Obviously still high, but it's not like that's the only place where illegal firearms are coming from. So, yeah. But, yeah. If these guns are originating in the U.S. and actually going over the border to Mexico, now that my brain has caught up with what I read, how can you say that it's being funneled illegally by Mexican drug cartels when it came from the U.S. to begin with? Because we want to regulate women's bodies, but so women can't get abortion, but if they get shot in the stomach, then that's perfectly grand. This is just insane. And he's going against someone who's a gun owner. Tim Walz is a hunter. I didn't realize that Kamala Harris was, but she is too. I mean, and they understand that something needs to be done. Now, I hope they mention this, but he also did the usual railing against mental health issues. Yes, then how come Republicans keep voting against any sort of mental health help? I mean, you can't scream, oh, it's a mental health issue, and then do nothing to help that issue. But let's keep going. Another Vance quote. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities, and this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. What do you think law enforcement is doing? I just don't understand why he seems to think that big cities, what, he doesn't think they have a police force, that the police just sit there and twiddle their thumbs as big cities get shot up? What is he thinking is happening? Of course. So, the fact check. Of course, crime rates vary by city, but overall, across the country, violent crime dropped nationwide in 2023, with murder falling to around 10% from the year before, according to data released just last week from the FBI. More than 16,000 law enforcement agencies sent their crime data to the FBI, covering around 94% of the country's population. So again, statistics, this is why Vance doesn't like experts, because statistics show him to be a liar. And he doesn't want this to be true. He wants people scared so people will vote for him and Trump. Hell, Trump basically said that at his debate. Well, not about I want to keep you afraid, but that the FBI is lying. All right. This year-end data, released each fall by the FBI, is the most complete look at national crime rates we have, but it is a little dated. Still, according to preliminary FBI data, violent crime has continued to drop nationwide in the first half of 2024 compared to the first half of 2023. Data from other researchers also mirror those results. Some crime analysts say it's likely that violent crime rates will fall below pre-pandemic levels by the end of the year. All right, so again, not what Vance wanted to say. He was hoping that people would just out and out believe him. So let's go to China, and this is where Walz had a bit of a time. So the moderator. Governor, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in 1989, but Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy? And this is part of what Walz said. I've not been perfect, and I'm a knucklehead at times. Which is basically him saying, oops. And I got there that summer and misspoke on this. Which, for those who are unaware, August is still technically summer. I realize if you're from the Midwest, it may not feel like it, depending on what part of the Midwest you're from, but it's still summer. So, Walz has a long relationship with China, claimed that he'd been there about 30 or dozens of times. But after APM reports questioned how that was possible, his campaign acknowledged the real number of trips from the U.S. to China was closer to 15. Okay, so a dozen times. Walz lived in China for about a year, teaching in the southern city of Foshan. His stint with the nonprofit organization World Teach started in the summer of 1989, just 2 months after the Tiananmen Square massacre. Starting in 1993, he led annual summer trips to China for students in the Nebraska and Minnesota high schools where he taught. Walz also described being in Hong Kong in May 1989 during the student uprising that culminated in the Tiananmen Square massacre. The reporting for APM Reports notes an assertion that is belied by newspaper accounts at the time. So, yeah. That is the last of the fact checks. Now, the one thing they didn't mention is Vance. Now, this isn't a fact, because this isn't a fact check per se, but Vance claimed that we need to be more pro-family, which sounds great, which I would hasten to add, I don't see how this country could be any more pro-family, because, let's face it, you go to the grocery store, or you go to the restaurant. Well, maybe not so much the restaurant, but you go to the grocery store, you want to buy even the prepackaged meal service, the meal delivery services. Most of them assume that you are buying for more than one person. Which, I mean, if you have a freezer where you can stick a lot of stuff, or a big refrigerator, or more than one refrigerator, depending on your circumstance, that would be fine. But if you're buying for one person, it is incredibly hard to buy just one thing. You go to a restaurant, and smaller portions cost more than larger portions. Now, you can say that, oh, you don't have to eat the whole thing, you can take it home, which is true. But what if you're not big on leftovers? What if you don't want to take it home? Same thing with the grocery store. What if you don't want to make, sloppy joes for a week because you're going to get sick of it after the second day? Because let's face it, there are certain foods that, and it depends, and it changes from person to person. It depends on, the food that you're eating. Some foods you can eat every day for years and be perfectly fine. Others you might have for a few months and you're like, okay, I can't look at this anymore, let alone actually eat it. So I would argue that we're very pro-family. So there's that. But he says we need to be more pro-family. That allowing women to decide whether they want to, that there are women out there who want to go back to work immediately after giving birth. I'm sorry, what? Did you pay zero attention to your wife whenever she gave birth? I mean, you keep bringing up your beautiful children, but did you actually pay attention to your wife? I'm going to say that she didn't just pop out a kid and then jump up and say, okay, I'm ready to go back. I mean, maybe if she had to, women will do that, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't want a few days off, whether it be to bond with the baby or just rest, or most likely both. So, yeah, a lot of women took issue with that. But he used that, this was some bizarre rant that he went on about abortion. That we need to be more pro-family because we need to make it more financially feasible for women to have children. Now that I'm fine with. That I have no problem with. But he said that after Tim Walz pointed out a woman who had felt, after he actually said it, not Walz, Vance said it. He talked about this story about this friend of his, or his sister, I can't remember now, who was in an abusive relationship. I'm sorry, I don't care how financially feasible giving birth is. If you're in an abusive relationship, chances are you aren't going to want to have the kid at all. Because maybe if you got out of the abusive relationship and you still wanted the kid, that would be different. But if you are in an abusive relationship and you don't want to bring a kid into this hellhole that you're in, that has nothing to do with finances and everything to do with safety and your mental health. Forget the physical health at this point. It's your mental health and worrying about bringing a child into this world where God knows what the husband's going to do. So that was just bizarre how he went to this pro-family shtick after he himself gave a sad story of a woman who felt she had no choice but to have an abortion. And his takeaway is not to get her out of this abusive relationship and give her resources to get her out, but which would, theoretically make her possibly more willing to give birth, provided that she's not, I don't want to carry my abuser's baby. That's also a possibility. It all depends on how you feel about the situation. But his takeaway is that it should be more financially doable to have a family. Now, again, I'm not saying he's wrong about the finances, because I understand that pregnancy and giving birth is expensive, but not the takeaway he should have for that story he gave. Because the takeaway is dealing with a woman who's in an abusive situation, not finances. Now, if he said that this guy was abusive because of cost, then at least that would tie into his spiel about making pregnancy and childbirth more affordable. That would at least tie into his story. But he didn't. He just said an abusive relationship. So you cannot assume that because that the abuse was financial, that he was upset with her because of how expensive her pregnancy was, or just finances in general. We don't know, because he didn't say. He just went from one story, which seemingly had nothing to do with what he wanted to talk about. As if he mentioning that he knew someone who had an abortion and the sad circumstances she was under, it suddenly makes him totally knowledgeable and understanding of women in that situation, when he completely ignored the abuse part. So anyway, and then of course, now this fact check didn't make it into the article, but Vance, and I mean technically this isn't a fact check, but Waltz asked Vance if he would certify an election, if he would have certified the 2020 election, like Mike Pence refused to do because, he refused to turn on Donald. Let's try that again. He refused to do what Donald Trump wanted. Ugh. So, he refused to do what Donald Trump wanted, so Donald Trump sent a mob to try to hang him. And Waltz asked Vance, would you have certified 2020? And he just talked about how, I'm not looking towards the past, I'm looking towards the future. And Waltz just said, that's a damning non-answer. And his response to that is, what's damning is censorship, and that Kamala Harris is censoring people from spouting misinformation, because people should be able to air their views. We're not talking about opinions. And I have a commenter on my channel who does this with regularity, or at least she did. This idea that if someone says something, then that magically becomes their opinion. And if I point out that factually this is wrong, and you're proving that you don't know what you were talking about, that somehow I'm then censoring other people's opinions, which, number one, I'm leaving it up on my channel, so I'm not stopping them. But I am pointing out that you're an idiot. So, yeah, there's this idea that reality means nothing. If I speak something into existence, that means just as much as if you spoke something into existence, regardless of whether the facts agree with either one of us. And so, yeah, and that was a theme from Vance. And he even said that you should trust Donald Trump, not the experts. Why do we have experts? And he actually claimed that the experts were wrong on something, and I have no idea if those so-called experts he was talking about, I can't remember the context, were actually wrong or he was making shit up. I would have loved that fact check to have said something about that. But this idea that because experts have, and people do this with science in general, because they got it wrong once, that means they can't be trusted on anything. Experts will get things wrong. They are human. Then when they get more information, they can change their minds and correct. Because I can assure you, the people, generally, especially in science, generally when something is shown to be wrong, it isn't these plucky band of science deniers or reality deniers who are pointing it out. It comes from within the institution. It comes from within experts. It comes from within science, depending on the issue. So this idea that we create our own reality by just speaking things into existence and it suddenly becomes real. Like, Haitian immigrants are there illegally because I don't like the program that they're here under. I consider it illegal, which he also said that it happened under Kamala Harris's watch. And before Tim Walz's mic was muted, he pointed out that this program he's talking about has been around since 1990. So, yeah, this man doesn't care about facts. And he's made it very, very apparent. He literally said, I do not care about facts. So, yeah. I'm not thrilled about Walz mentioning that he misspoke, but at the same time, at least he owned up to it, as opposed to denying that he said anything, like J.D. Vance was doing, like denying his past statements about how much he abhorred Trump. So that at least helps. I mean, he said, yeah, sometimes I'm a knucklehead. And let's face it, when we're talking about something that happened in 89, I had a coworker who was born that year. I was still in high school in 89. So I didn't graduate till 90. So that's a long time ago. I'm 53 now. You know, I was 18 at the time. Well, 17, 18. I'm not going to remember everything I did and the exact time period I did it in. I'm happy that I remember what I did yesterday. So, yeah, people make mistakes. That's why he said that sometimes I'm a knucklehead. It's not like he was trying to be facetious. It's not like he was trying to, maybe he was trying to oversell his qualifications by saying he was there during the Tiananmen Square uprising. Maybe he thought that was a good idea at the time. I mean, that's possible. And now he realizes, well, that was dumb. But he also wanted to emphasize, his qualifications. So was it a good thing? No, lying is never a good thing. And that's, maybe he was confused. Maybe he was lying. Either way, not a great thing. But the fact is he owned up to it. He mentioned he misspoke, but at least he owned up to it. He's like, yeah, I said that. So So yeah, as far as now, Tim Walz has mentioned he's a bad debater, and for some bits it showed. But for the most part, I can see why people basically are calling this a tie. Because let's face it, JD Vance didn't go all cuckoo bananas. He didn't call him Traitor Tim. He didn't call him Tampon Tim. He didn't call him any names. Actually, there was a lot of, I agree with this thing, I agree with that thing. So there was a lot of that because Midwest Nice is a thing. Unless you seriously piss us off, in which case, yeah. We're Midwest Nice up to a point. Everybody has their limits. But, yeah, I can see why people thought that it was a tie if you just went by demeanor. And the fact that one person agreed with the other one many times. You know, that there were parts that they agreed with. And, but there were things, like I said, you know, denying January 6th, that, you know, oh, it was supposed to be peaceful. Bullshit. Trump even said, be there on January 6th, will be wild. You don't say that for a peaceful protest. So yeah. You'd have to actually listen to what J.D. Vance was saying to realize that he decided to have no grasp on reality. And what Tim Walz was saying to discern what he could say. The other thing is that Tim Walz was talking super fast. It was obviously he had a lot of stuff to get out in a short amount of time, and he wanted to make sure he got everything in. So that wasn't great, but at the same time, he did his job. Did this move the needle? Probably not. Vice presidential debates are generally a do no harm type debates. Just don't make your running mate look bad. And I don't think either one did. Actually, it's hilarious that Trump needs to be the focus of attention so much that I read while he was watching the debate, he went on Truth Social and didn't talk about the debate. He talked about Pete Rose, who died yesterday, or was it 2 days ago? I think it was yesterday. Who had just died. Saying how it's a shame he's not in the Hall of Fame and blah, 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 because he didn't like that people like J.D. Vance's performance at the debate better than Trump, because he didn't act like a raving lunatic. I mean, some of the things he said were just, what the hell, dude? But at least he wasn't acting like a raving lunatic. So, yeah, it was quite an enjoyable debate. And, yeah, I wish more debates were that civil. I mean, even if you don't agree even a little bit with your opponent, that you don't act like a raving lunatic. Now, if you're going to act like a raving lunatic, then yeah, you deserve to be mocked. So I'm not going to blame Kamala Harris that she was a part of the incivility of the debate. Well, she was mocking him because he was saying totally cuckoo bananas shit in a cuckoo bananas way. So, I think that is all I have for this article. I'm over an hour, which I did not expect. So with that, I will see you guys in the next video.